Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when the pain wasn't accidental, when the betrayal was calculated, when the wound was delivered with intention. And tonight, I didn't come to sugarcoat it. I came to set somebody free that pain with purpose still has power. It's one thing to hurt because life caught you off guard. A sudden loss, a change in plans, a disappointment that came out of nowhere. But it's another thing entirely to hurt because someone chose to wound you. They saw you vulnerable and still decided to go for the hit. They knew what it would cost you. They knew it would shake your confidence, and they did it anyway. That kind of pain doesn't just sting. It lingers, it questions your worth, it invades your peace. It tries to convince you that you'll never be whole again. But here's what they didn't know. Pain with purpose still has power. Just because the wound was intentional doesn't mean the outcome is in their hands. Just because they meant it for evil doesn't mean it won't be used for good. Pain, when surrendered to the process, becomes more than a memory. It becomes a mirror that shows you what you're made of. A mirror that reveals what God is building even in the wreckage. You thought you were done, but pain revealed that you're deeper than what they touched. Stronger than what they tried to break. Wiser than the lie they told about you. See, pain that has no purpose is paralyzing. But when pain collides with purpose, it births power. It creates a new version of you, a version that's been through the fire and didn't burn. A version that knows how to worship with tears running down your face. A version that knows how to pray when the words won't come out, but your spirit is still groaning. A version that doesn't need applause to know you're anointed. A version that doesn't chase validation because you know you were chosen. They damaged you, yes, but what they didn't understand is that damaging the surface doesn't destroy the foundation. You were built with more than what meets the eye. You were built with a calling that goes deeper than any betrayal. And pain, when connected to that calling, becomes fuel. It becomes strategy. It becomes testimony. It becomes the very thing that pushes you into the next dimension of who you're meant to be. You may have walked through a season where you questioned everything, where you felt like you had to shrink just to survive, where you were constantly asking, why me? And the enemy tried to convince you that the damage was the end. But what he didn't know is that the damage was actually the doorway. The pain created pressure, and the pressure unlocked power. You stopped begging for people to treat you right and started commanding your space. You stopped showing up for people who left you in your darkest hour and started showing up for yourself. You stopped asking permission to heal and decided to heal anyway. That's what pain with purpose does. It wakes you up. It calls you higher. It makes you see yourself again. Not the version they manipulated, not the version they gaslit, not the version they walked over. The real you, the you that God spoke over before they ever touched your life, the you that still carries destiny in your bones and fire in your soul, the you that won't be silenced just because someone else couldn't handle your strength. There is power in surviving what was meant to break you. There is power in choosing not to become what hurt you. There is power in forgiving without giving them access again. That power doesn't mean you didn't feel it. That power doesn't mean it didn't cost you anything. It means that even though you were damaged, you weren't destroyed. Even though they tried to break you, something inside of you refused to die. That's power. Power that grows in silence. Power that grows in isolation. Power that grows in surrender. Power that doesn't need a platform to be real, just obedience. Because when you realize that your pain was never wasted, that your suffering wasn't for nothing, that the tears watered something greater than your present moment, that's when purpose starts speaking louder than pain. That's when clarity begins to settle in the fog of confusion. That's when you stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what is this preparing me for? Because pain that prepares is pain that transforms. It doesn't just leave scars, it leaves strategy. It leaves wisdom. It leaves discernment. Too. It leaves a fire that can't be extinguished. Even when the lights go out and the crowd disappears, they targeted your potential, not your past. When people come against you, it's easy to assume it's because of something you've done. Maybe it's the way you grew up. Maybe it's the mistakes you made. Maybe it's the baggage you're still carrying. But can I tell you something real? People don't always attack what you've done. Sometimes they attack what they see coming. They sense something rising in you that you haven't even seen yet. They don't need you to be fully healed, fully successful, fully whole. They just need to sense the possibility of it. And suddenly you're a threat. You were attacked not because of where you've been, but because of where you're going. Your presence irritated spirits that weren't rooted in purpose. Your confidence made people who operate in insecurity uncomfortable. Your vision made those who settle for less feel exposed, and they didn't need proof that you were going to succeed. Your posture alone revealed that favor was on your life, so they came for you early. They tried to break you before you could bloom. They tried to distract you before you could develop. They tried to keep you bound in the shame of your past so you wouldn't realize your future had already been set apart. The thing is, when people can't control you, they'll try to contain you. They'll try to limit you with labels. They'll bring up your past to keep you from walking into your calling. They'll remind you of who you used to be because deep down, they know who you might become. You were never just a person to them. You were a mirror, a reminder of what they refused to heal, a reflection of what they chose to settle for. And rather than rise with you, they tried to reduce you. But the danger of being chosen is that your potential will always speak louder than your performance. God didn't wait for you to get it all together before He called you. He called you in the middle of your mess. He called you when you were still hiding, when you were still doubting, when you were still healing. And that calling put a target on your back. Because when heaven authorizes your destiny, hell takes notice. The people who came against you weren't just responding to your personality. They were reacting to your power. They may have whispered behind your back, tried to exclude you, tried to discredit you, tried to humiliate you. But the truth is, they saw something in you they couldn't explain. And what they couldn't explain, they tried to eliminate. It wasn't personal. It was prophetic. They were reacting to the glow you didn't even know you had. The favor you hadn't even walked into yet. You were dangerous before you even stepped into your full authority. And that's why they tried to contain you with criticism. That's why they tried to shrink you with shame. That's why they tried to bury you in doubt. But what they didn't realize is that your potential was not theirs to approve. They couldn't cancel what they didn't create. And the attacks only revealed how much they feared what was inside of you. Your potential was loud, even when you were silent. Your potential was disruptive, even when you tried to play small. Your potential was undeniable, even when you were unsure of yourself. That's the kind of energy that shakes atmospheres. That's the kind of promise that breaks generational patterns. That's the kind of purpose that refuses to stay hidden. They thought they were coming against a weak version of you, but what they were really doing was waking up something stronger. They thought they were silencing your voice, but they were actually sharpening your message. They thought they were stopping your progress, but they were pushing you into alignment. Because sometimes the pushback is the confirmation. Sometimes the resistance is the signal that you're on the right track. Sometimes the attack is the announcement that the enemy sees what's coming, and he's scared. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone who tried to break you. You don't have to shrink to fit their comfort. You don't have to hide your gifts because they made someone else feel small. You were targeted because you carry something that can't be ignored, something that changes rooms, something that lifts others, something that builds legacies, something that sets captives free. And when you walk in that potential unapologetically, you stop explaining yourself and start expanding. What broke you also built you. The breaking didn't feel like a blessing when it happened. It felt like abandonment. It felt like rejection. It felt like failure. It felt like being forgotten, overlooked, crushed beneath the weight of what you didn't deserve. It felt like the ground gave out and the people you thought would catch you turned away. It felt like silence from heaven and chaos all around. And in that moment, it was easy to believe that this breaking was the end of your strength, the end of your identity, the end of your dreams. But as time passed and the dust began to settle, something else started to take shape. Something subtle, something sacred. You began to notice that the pieces of you that cracked open were making room for something new, that the pain carved out space for deeper purpose, that what tried to shatter you actually revealed what couldn't be broken. It didn't make sense at first. How could something that hurt this deeply also carry so much potential? How could devastation coexist with destiny? But then you started to see it. You started to see you, not the you that existed before the breaking, but the one who survived it. The version of you that came out of the breaking was different, wiser, stronger, more aware, more sensitive to purpose, more anchored in truth. The breaking humbled you, but it also revealed you. It exposed the fragile things you were depending on. It pulled back the curtain on relationships that were never rooted in love. It showed you what needed to die so something greater could live. The breaking wasn't punishment, it was preparation. It was not about losing yourself. It was about shedding the false self you had to wear just to keep peace, to keep approval, to keep functioning. Every crack, every wound, every tear became a place where light could get in. And not just any light, your light. The kind of light that's born through endurance. The kind of light that can't be taught, only lived. The kind of light that says, I've been through the fire, and I still found my faith. The kind of light that carries power not because it's perfect, but because it's real. You weren't built in your victories. You were built in the breaking. The breaking taught you how to get back up when nothing around you made sense. The breaking taught you how to breathe when grief wrapped around your chest like a chain. The breaking taught you how to believe again, not in what you see, but in what you know deep down. The breaking doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're becoming. Becoming the kind of person who doesn't just shine on the mountaintop, but also learns how to stand in the valley. Becoming the kind of soul who can carry others because you know what it feels like to crawl. Becoming the kind of heart that doesn't judge the wound, but understands it. The breaking wasn't there to destroy you, it was there to awaken you. To peel back the layers of protection and performance and perfection so you could get back to the core. The raw, real, deeply rooted you. What broke you also built your boundaries, built your discernment, built your prayer life, built your voice, built your capacity to love more deeply and forgive more freely. Built your clarity around who deserves access to you. Built your awareness of your own worth. Built your ability to walk away from what doesn't honor your purpose. You're not the same person you were before the breaking, and that's not a tragedy. That's a testimony, because something had to die in order for something else to rise. The breaking stripped you, yes, but it also refined you. It also redefined you. And maybe the world didn't notice the rebuild because it wasn't loud. Maybe it didn't happen in a spotlight. Maybe it happened behind closed doors with tear-streaked prayers and quiet whispers of a God, I'm still here. But just because it wasn't loud doesn't mean it wasn't real. What was built in secret will sustain you in public. What was built in brokenness will carry you through battle. What was built in silence will speak for itself when the time is right. There's a strength that only shows up in the aftermath, a kind of beauty that only grows through the breaking after the jury. You didn't just survive what broke you. You were rebuilt with sacred hands, reassembled with divine care, reinforced with lessons that no comfort could have taught. And the foundation that's built in brokenness, it holds. It holds when the winds come. It holds when people leave. It holds when doubt rises. It holds when the next storm threatens to undo you again. Healing is not asking for justice. It's choosing freedom. It's not sitting around waiting for an apology that may never come. It's not hoping that the people who hurt you will one day understand the weight of what they did. Healing isn't about making them feel what you felt or watching them suffer the way you suffered. Healing is deciding that your future is worth more than your pain. It's drawing a line in the sand and saying, I will not stay stuck here. I will not carry this with me any longer. There's a lie that says if you forgive too soon, they get away with it. That if you let it go, you're saying it was okay. But real healing doesn't need revenge to feel complete. It doesn't need closure to move forward. Healing doesn't wait for justice to show up with a bow tied around it. Healing shows up when you do. When you decide that your peace matters more than your pride. When you recognize that your heart deserves to breathe again. When you stop rehearsing the betrayal over and over, trying to make sense of something that was never going to make sense. You don't need them to validate your pain in order for it to be real. You don't need them to take responsibility in order to be released. The chains that keep you tied to what they did are on their wrists. They're on yours, and the key was never in their hands. Healing is choosing to pick up that key, to unlock the doors that trauma tried to seal shut. To give yourself permission to live again, trust again, love again, even if it's slow, even if it's messy, even if it doesn't look like how the world defines healing. You don't have to wait for justice to walk into the room before you start healing. Because sometimes justice won't look like what you wanted. Sometimes the people who caused the damage will never admit it. They'll rewrite the story to make themselves look better. They'll walk around like nothing happened, like they didn't leave you bleeding. And if you wait on them to make it right, you'll miss your life waiting for someone else's conscience to wake up. That's not freedom. That's bondage dressed in hope. Freedom is saying, you don't get to define my next chapter. Freedom is taking your story back. It's learning to love the sound of your own laughter again. It's making space in your heart for joy that isn't tied to who hurt you or how they left. Freedom is quiet. It doesn't always make a grand entrance. It's the peace that slips in after the rage has settled. It's the breath you didn't know you were holding finally being released. It's the smile that shows up uninvited and doesn't ask for permission to stay. Healing is holy work. It's sacred ground, and it doesn't require anyone else's participation. It happens in your spirit. It happens in the still moments when no one is watching, when you're choosing not to go back to what you outgrew, when you're deciding that your identity is not found in what they broke, but in what you're building now. Healing isn't just about feeling better, it's about being free. Free to show up as your full self, free to stop explaining your boundaries, free to stop seeking justice in places where justice doesn't live. And that doesn't mean it didn't matter. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt. That doesn't mean you didn't cry for nights on end wondering if you'd ever feel whole again. What it means is that you refuse to let what happened define who you become. You refuse to let bitterness take root in your soil. You refuse to let someone else's inability to love you right keep you from loving yourself deeply. Healing is reclaiming your time, reclaiming your energy, reclaiming your voice. It's deciding that the story doesn't end with pain. It evolves into power, and maybe it's slow. Maybe it takes longer than you expected. Maybe some days you still feel the ache. That's okay. Healing isn't linear. Some days you'll feel strong, and other days the memory will come back sharp and unexpected. But even then, healing is in motion. Because healing isn't about never feeling it again. It's about no longer being controlled by it. It's about being able to look at what once broke you and say, I'm not the same person who stood in that storm. Not because justice showed up, not because they fixed it, but because you decided your freedom could no longer wait. Your silence was survival, but your voice is revival. There was a time when keeping quiet felt like the only way to stay safe. When silence became your shield, your hiding place, your last line of defense against a world that didn't know how to hold your truth, you learned to measure your words, to read the room, to shrink yourself in order to avoid conflict, rejection, or more pain. You bit your tongue when you should have spoken up. You nodded when everything in you wanted to scream. You smiled through things that broke your spirit because survival demanded that you stay small, stay agreeable, stay silent. But silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's prison. Sometimes it's the residue of trauma dressed up as strength. Sometimes it's the fear that if you really said what happened, if you really told the truth about what you felt, you'd lose people, opportunities, or even your identity. And so you carried it. You buried. You mastered the art of pretending everything was okay, even when your soul was barely hanging on. You didn't silence yourself because you were weak. You silenced yourself because you were doing the best you could with what you had. But now something in you is shifting. There's a stirring, a rising, a cracking open of the parts you locked away, because your voice isn't just sound, it's power, it's presence, it's prophecy. And every time you silence your truth, you also silence your healing. Your voice is the path to your revival. Your voice is the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. It's not about being loud, it's about being honest. It's about standing in your story without shame and saying, this is what happened, and this is who I am now. Your voice doesn't need permission to be heard. It doesn't need perfection to be powerful. You don't have to wait until you're fully healed to speak. Sometimes it's your speaking that begins the healing. Because when you open your mouth, you begin to release the weight. You begin to dismantle the lies that told you to stay quiet. Lies that said no one would believe you. Lies that said you'd be too much. Lies that said it was your fault. Your voice tells the truth, and the truth sets you free. There is revival in saying what you were told to forget. There is revival in naming what tried to steal your identity. There is revival in telling the story from your side, not the version others created to protect themselves, but the real version, the raw version, the you were there and you remember what it felt like version. Your silence protected you once, but now it's time to speak not just for survival, but for transformation, for liberation. For the younger version of you who never got the chance to be heard, for the next person who needs the courage to speak because you did it first. Your voice is not just for you. It's for every person watching you rise. It's for every person who thought they were alone in their pain. It's for every person who thought silence was strength, but now sees that vulnerability is power. Your voice is legacy, its impact, its ministry. Ooh, it's a weapon against shame. It's a tool for change. It's an invitation for others to step into their truth too. You don't have to scream to be strong. You don't have to argue to be right. You don't have to beg to be heard. You just have to speak with authority, with authenticity, with the anointing that comes from survival. Because survival gave you wisdom, but your voice gives you wings, and you were never meant to live in hiding. You were never meant to be muted. You were meant to rise, to roar, to declare that what tried to bury you didn't win. There will always be people who prefer your silence, who benefited from your quiet compliance, who felt more powerful when you stayed small. But your healing demands that you no longer live to protect other people's comfort. Your truth deserves space. Your story deserves air. You don't owe the world a filtered version of yourself to be accepted. The real you, the one who has lived through the fire and still has breath, that you is the one who carries revival. Every time you speak your truth, you reclaim a piece of yourself that silence tried to steal. Every time you use your voice, you resurrect the parts of you that survival forced into silence. There's a version of you on the other side of this that they never saw coming. They saw the broken version. They saw the confused version. They saw the hurt, the insecure, the timid, the unsure version. They saw the version of you that was just trying to make it through the day, just trying to keep breathing when everything in your life felt like it was falling apart. They witnessed you when you were doubting yourself, when you were questioning your worth, when you were trying to figure out if you even had a future beyond the pain. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't even imagine, was the version of you that was being forged in the fire. You were not just surviving, you were becoming. You were learning how to rebuild, how to stand again, how to hope again. You were being shaped in silence, molded in the background, strengthened in the shadows. And the you that's emerging now is not the same person who went through the storm. This version of you walks differently, talks differently, thinks differently. This version of you is not afraid of the dark anymore because you've been through darker and still made it out with your light intact. They underestimated the power of your comeback. They didn't count on you healing. They didn't expect you to forgive. They didn't think you would ever find peace. They assumed the damage they did would keep you stuck, would keep you small, would keep you replaying the pain over and over like a soundtrack you couldn't turn off. But something in you decided differently. Something in you rose up and said, I will not be defined by what they did. I will not let their choices write my ending. And from that decision, something began to shift. The version of you on the other side of this has boundaries, has vision, has clarity, has strength that is not loud but unshakable. You're not seeking validation from people who couldn't handle your vulnerability. You're not begging for seats at tables that were never built to honor your presence. You're building your own table. You're creating space where truth is welcome, where healing is celebrated, where authenticity is the standard. You're not chasing approval anymore. You're walking in alignment. In that shift, that internal realignment, that's where the power lives. The person you're becoming now doesn't operate from wounds. You operate from wisdom. You don't react the way you used to. You don't need to prove your worth to people who chose not to see it. You've stopped explaining your value. You've stopped waiting for apologies to move forward. You've stopped apologizing for needing space, for saying no, for choosing peace. Because this version of you has learned how to honor your own growth, how to protect your peace without guilt, how to walk away without losing your balance. You don't need chaos to feel connected anymore. You've grown beyond that, and the growth wasn't easy. It cost you something. It cost you comfort. It cost you relationships. It cost you the version of yourself who accepted less just to feel loved. But every time you released what was no longer serving you, you made space for something greater. Every time you said no to what hurt, you said yes to what heals. And that's what they didn't see coming. Your refusal to stay buried, your refusal to stay bitter, your refusal to be anyone other than who God called you to be. Now, when you walk into a room, you carry the evidence of what you've survived. Not in your pain, but in your presence. in your posture, in the way you speak with authority even when your voice shakes, in the way you love without losing yourself, in the way you show up fully even when it would be easier to shrink. They see your confidence, but they don't know the cost. They see the glow, but they don't know the grind. They see the fruit, but they didn't witness the fight. This version of you is not a fluke. It's not a phase. It's the result of intentional healing, of choosing growth over comfort, of choosing faith over fear. You didn't just bounce back, you rebuilt. You chose purpose when pain was easier. You chose wholeness when bitterness seemed justified. You chose to rise when staying down would have made more sense. And that choice changed everything. There is a fire in your eyes now that wasn't there before. Not because you didn't always have it, but because now you know how to use it. There's a certainty in your step, a grace in your movement, a wisdom in your silence. You don't flinch at the things that used to shake you. You don't chase after people who were never meant to stay. You don't carry shame like it belongs to you, because the version of you they never saw coming has arrived, ladies and gentlemen. Everything they did to break you became the soil for your becoming. You were not just damaged, you were developed. You were not just wounded, you were awakened. This journey wasn't about revenge, it was about resurrection. You've learned to rise not in spite of what happened, but because of it. Your silence turned to strength, your pain became purpose. And now you walk in power they never expected. The version of you standing here today is proof that intentional damage cannot stop divine destiny. You are the evidence. You are the revival, and you are just getting started.